This is an interview with Lauryn Gould by Morris Nelms on the 20th of September 2018. Lauryn Gould is a performer, educator, arranger, community music facilitator, and event curator, and can be seen making music and teaching in a wide variety of contexts, playing flute, saxophone, piano, guitar, and ukulele. I have worked with her, and I know that she also sings quite well. Lauryn earned her Bachelor of Music in Flute Performance from Texas State University, graduating summa cum laude, and has just completed her master's degree in community music from the Irish World Academy of Music and Dance at the University of Limerick, Ireland. What year was that?
I finished in 2015.
2015, so very recently. And currently, she can be seen performing around Austin and various other places with various groups. In some ways, you could say too many to mention, but the Cats and the Canary, her jazz trio, Floyd Domino's All-Stars, the Rock Step Revelators, the Charlie Christians, which is a group I got to play with, the Texas Moaners, the Golden Hour Quartet, and the Brooks Prumo Orchestra. And then she also was the founding director of a group called the Sound Bridge Project, which was trying to put classical music into places it doesn't normally appear, to make it more accessible. In addition, she is also the vice president, or serves as the vice president, I should say, for the Hot Rhythm Foundation, a nonprofit organization that is dedicated to the support of Austin's early jazz and swing dance community. Thank you very much, Lauryn Gould, for being here.
Thank you.
What year did you begin your studies at Texas State as an undergraduate?
2006.
Okay. And why did you choose Texas State?
Well, at the time, I was kind of reconnecting with music. So I had initially actually come to Texas State for art in 2003. And I had a bunch of life things happen, and I kind of stopped. I did stop. And then I rediscovered my passion for music, and I reached a point, I could tell stories about this, but I reached a point where it felt like I wanted to start taking it more seriously and to really develop as a grounded musician. And flute was the instrument that I played well enough to audition on. And so my friend Beth Gallagher, actually, who's a wonderful musician, jazz musician, and lots of other styles, flute, saxophone, I think she also plays fiddle. Anyway, she kind of took me under her wing and recommended that I reach out to Dr. Jones here at Texas State. And so I had a lesson with Dr. Jones, and I could tell that she was going to give me the motivation that I needed to really develop as a flutist and as a musician. And luckily I passed the audition I think by the skin of my teeth to get in here and study with Dr. Jones. And then once I was here, I found that I really felt like I was in the right place. So
Excellent.
Hopefully that answers the question.
That was excellent. So what are some of your most memorable experiences while you were an undergraduate here? Or if you want to, just for the record, Lauryn is currently a master's degree student here at Texas State, pursuing a performance degree in jazz saxophone.
Yes.
And so if you want to talk about, you've only been here, this is your first semester as a graduate student, so you probably haven't had that many memorable experiences yet. But
it's been pretty good so far, actually, I'd say.
So if you want to talk about either one, memorable experiences that you've had at Texas State.
Okay. There's so many. Well, the first thing that I think of from my undergrad is just the kind of culture and community around both the flute studio and the music program in general. So we had a very tight-knit flute studio. It felt kind of like a family, you know, and Dr. Jones really kind of fostered that, which was really nice, because sometimes, especially flute and classical music, can be very competitive, and although it was challenging and the expectations were always very high of us in our studio, it didn't have that kind of cutthroat, competitive vibe. It was much more of a supportive vibe and encouraging each other to be better just for the sake of being better, as opposed to for the sake of competition, which I really appreciated. And then it also gave me, the experience of starting to explore improvisation and jazz, and so being in combo with yourself and having improv lessons with you was really really wonderful, and kind of opening up my world to that. And I also got to have combo with Freddie Mendoza, and that was really great as well. So I remember, I think, was it in your combo that Janelle and I were in the combo together and we did piccolo duets? Or that might have been in Freddie's combo.
I can't remember.
It was a long time ago.
Yeah.
It must have been like almost 10 years ago now.
Mm-hmm.
But getting to, so some of my favorite things were, experiences like, going from playing with the orchestra to going down to visit George's and doing the combo concert, and just having this really varied experience. And world music classes with Gordon were really inspiring to me. And just having, because I didn't necessarily just want to come to school to become a good flute player. I wanted to come to be a good musician. And so I felt like I had a really nice wide variety of experiences while I was here. And I feel like the faculty was always so generous with their time and their knowledge and their support that, I felt totally comfortable knocking on anybody's door and asking questions, and I felt very welcomed, and that was always really, and it holds true still, which is really great. And so
I agree
I
as
really
well.
appreciate that.
When I was a graduate student here, I had the same experience. And it's interesting to me that what you describe as being the thing that you liked is still the thing that you've practiced. Your musical palette is diversified more than the average musicians, I would say. Maybe not so much now, the younger generation, but definitely more than the musicians of my generation. Because you're interested in Irish traditional music, you're interested in traditional jazz, you're interested in classical literature for your instrument, as well as just classical literature in general. Like you already mentioned, world music. Tell us about your senior recital was a little bit of the stuff of legend for a second there.
Oh my goodness.
Because it was, as I recall, it was like double the length it was slotted to be, and it had like all kinds of music on it. That's one of the things I remember about it.
Yeah.
And then Ada Jones was not happy, but she also wasn't disappointed or something to that effect.
Yeah. It's interesting to hear that. I can tend to pile things on in my life, and because, like you said, I'm really interested in a variety of things. We had a flute quintet arrangement of Debussy Prelude to Afternoon of Fawn. We had a Baroque concerto, Binda concerto with string quintet. And we had, there's a Ravi Shankar piece that had harp, and I added tabla because,
sure,
why not?
Right.
And there was Ian Clark piece, and there's a Reinecke sonata. So it was, it was a wide variety of things, and I think it was like almost 2 hours long.
That's what I remember. Yeah.
Yeah, and so apologies for that. But it was. It was a big deal for me to be able to do that. And looking back, you don't really have many opportunities unless you make them in your life to put together something like that. So it's good to kind of, I think, take advantage of, the ability to curate a concert of some of your favorite things where you're forced to take the time to learn all of this wonderful high-level music and to assemble these players to do this thing, and I promoted it pretty heavily in my community. So we had a nice crowd there, and that's definitely one of the highlights of my musical. Like I wish I could go back and do it again with the skill that I have now, you know, like
sure.
8 years later.
So,
But,
did you
you know.
get a good recording of it?
I think I did, yeah. And I've listened back to, actually, I think it's on my iTunes, and so every once in a while it comes up in a shuffle, and some of the movements or pieces I'll be like, who is that playing? And then I'll be like, oh, it's me. Cool. You know, and other times I'm like, oh, what was that? Oh, it's me. You know,
Yeah.
so
I think
so
every
there's-
musician has those experiences.
Yeah, there's a little bit of both there, but it's nice to go back and listen to it and every once in a while.
Well, I'm glad we touched on that. That was one of the things that I really remembered about your time as an undergraduate. So, it says here who was and who were some of your major influences. I know we've already talked about Eric
Eric Hokanen.
Hokanen.
Yes.
I was going to get his name wrong if I didn't ask you. So, Eric Hokanen, who's a local, plays violin, right?
Yeah,
And-
violin, guitar, mandolin.
And guitar, and that's where you met your husband. Mm-hmm. So this is one of the big influences. You've mentioned him as well. He plays essentially hot jazz music as well as other kinds of improvised music on violin.
All kinds.
Yeah, all kinds of stuff. Who else would you mention as influences, pivotal influences for you? Who's your influence? I'm curious. Who's the main influence on flute? If you're playing flute, if you're modeling yourself after someone, who would you think about?
Oh man, in jazz,
Or in classical?
in classical, my favorite sound is Emmanuel Pahud.
Okay.
He's not somebody that I interact with personally. Obviously, I did get to meet him once, which was I was pretty starstruck. But it was amazing to hear him play and to hear a master class with him. But and to meet him briefly. But for jazz stuff, I honestly don't listen to a lot of flute players.
Yeah.
I listen and transcribe to a lot of other musicians, and I mean, I like Hubert Laws and Herbie Mann, and I like all of those guys, but they're not like my go-to. Just also because stylistically, I play a lot of the more early jazz and swing stuff, as you know, so there just weren't as many flute players who were kind of soloists, who weren't just kind of saxophone doublers. I don't want to say just saxophone doublers, I mean.
Yeah, but Frank West was
But
unusual.
Frank West, Wayman Carver, like there's a cool those Ella Fitzgerald with it was Chick Webb's band, and then when he died, she took over leading the band. And there's a cool recording of "I Found a New Baby." I found a new baby, where Wayman Carver takes a hot flute solo on it.
Awesome.
Which is really cool to hear it in that kind of older swing style.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a 1933 Cab Calloway recording where Walter Thomas, I think, is the sax.
Butch Thomas, yeah.
Yeah, he plays a hot flute solo on Some of These Days.
Wow.
Which I transcribed for Cats and the Canary, and so we play that version. And that was the first time I ever heard hot jazz played on flute, and I just almost.
Yeah,
My
sure.
lid. I mean, there's a video.
Sure.
There's a cool video of it on YouTube. And anyway,
I'd like to go ahead.
no, just that's like those are like as far as flute goes.
That's very interesting because you've had to make the transition. Okay, hang on about the transition. This might be interesting for other woodwind players. The transition from being a flute player to playing the saxophone.
Yeah.
It had to be quite a switch up.
Yeah.
Because I don't know if you play clarinet as well.
I'm just starting to.
Okay, so you're
work
just
on
starting.
that,
Yeah, I know you play soprano saxophone, tenor saxophone, but you went to them from a flute player's perspective.
Yeah.
So, what was
Well,
the big? Wow, this is a huge change. I mean, I'm just curious
Yeah.
how you would, and plus you're also going from improvising on an instrument, flute that you're extremely familiar with, to one that you're not familiar with nearly so much.
Yeah.
So how did that work out for you? How did you cope with it?
Yeah, well, that's it's interesting. I mean, I'm grateful that I started as a flute player because I think it's easier to go from flute to saxophone as far as tone production than to go from saxophone to flute because the flute embouchure is just so kind of esoteric, and you don't have that resistance. You don't have anything tangible that's in your mouth, you know, to kind of give you feedback. So it's nice to have that flute foundation so that, you know, my sound is kind of there, and although I have to keep my chops up, it's, you know, I know what to do to work on it. And then the saxophone, the way that I kind of, because I actually started playing saxophone a little bit before I came here for my undergrad, and then when I was here for my undergrad, I completely put it away, and I got it back out in 2012 or so. I was playing with Minor Mishap, I was playing piccolo, and funny story, we had 3 piccolos at the time, and my tuba player friend sat Daughtry, the band leader, down at some point. He slammed his hand down on the table and he said, "Daughtry, you do not need 3 piccolos in your band." So it wasn't necessarily that was the impetus for me switching, but eventually it just kind of got to the point where I was like, maybe I should be playing saxophone. Maybe I should, because we needed more saxes. And so I got the alto out of the closet, and I just went on the Dropbox for our music, and I just played all of the Mishap tunes on alto, and I was like, okay, I can do it. So there wasn't really, I mean, obviously I wasn't making a great sound, but I was making enough of a sound, and I had enough facility to kind of get through. And luckily it's like a community brass band, and it gave me the perfect opportunity to just play, and not really worry about it too much as far as the refinements go. Start improvising a little bit here and there, and then I started taking some lessons and actually starting to dial it in. But that was being able to have an opportunity to just play kind of in the wild on the instrument was, I think, really helpful in facilitating that transition. So yeah, and then refining it from there takes a lot of time. But I did find that when going from flute to saxophone, even though as far as like improvising goes, like there are certain frustrating moments where you go for something that in your muscle memory works on one instrument and it does not on the other. You know, just things like on flute you don't have an octave key, you know, you're overblowing. And on saxophone you do have an octave key. So if I'm going for an arpeggio or something that I would play on the flute, and I go to play that high fingering on the saxophone, obviously it's just not, it's just incorrect and not going to work. So there are certain frustrating moments where if I kind of stopped thinking about it and just play, my fingers would go to places that, even though there's a lot of similarity between flute and saxophone, those areas, really extreme high, extreme low, is where it's especially different. Those are where I would get tangled up, and you know, you have to just kind of laugh it off. But I did find that improvising in a group setting, the saxophone was incredibly satisfying because it gives you that resistance and it gives you that feedback. Where when a flute, I love the flute, but you can only, there's like a threshold where you're giving, it gives back to you, and then there's a threshold where it's like that's what you get, you know, that's all you get. And I think that's why people like Rahsaan Roland Kirk and Ian Anderson and those kind of guys would take, and Dolphy and those guys would take and extend what they would do on the instrument. We're adding vocal techniques and adding false fingerings and, you know, whatever, so that they could get more response out of the instrument, so they could dig in more when they really wanted to. Because if you're always just consistently wanting to make a really beautiful sound, then there's only so much, and the saxophone gives you that rawness, it gives you that, you could really wail on it, you know? And sometimes that's what you want. Sometimes you want something gentle and beautiful, and sometimes you want something that's very powerful. And having that range of voice on the saxophone was like opening up a whole like improvisatory world for me, where I started thinking more about rhythm and energy than necessarily about notes. And that for me was a big leap of like confidence.
You're talking about something that Dizzy Gillespie described when talking about Chu Berry. He said, I love Chu Berry because he could boot it.
Yeah, yeah.
All
Yeah.
tenor players understand that. Yeah,
Isn't it? That's
exactly.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's why I love. Well, as far as influences go, my favorite horn player and my dear friend John Doyle.
Mm-hmm.
He boots it.
Yeah, it's fantastic. I've played with John Doyle at least one time, maybe
Yeah.
a couple of times.
Yeah.
Wonderful musician.
Yeah.
And he's no longer in Austin, right? He moved.
He now lives in Port Townsend, Washington.
Okay.
Yeah, and he's traveling a lot, but
Good for him.
He'll be in town in November,
Okay.
so that'll be nice. Yeah.
So when you got finished with when did you graduate from Texas State with your undergraduate degree?
2010.
And what did you do after that? What was your first employment? What did you know?
I taught.
So you taught flute,
Lessons.
students
I said,
and
I said yes to every opportunity that came my way.
Mhm.
So I was teaching at 8 different schools, 7 days a week, including my house. I had 80 students. I was driving. I taught in Dripping Springs. I taught in Hayes County. I taught in Austin. My furthest north school was I taught at Murchison, and then which is like a Mopac and Far West area. And so I was driving, teaching, eating, sleeping, basically. And I did do a recital during that time of one of my composer friends' music. And so I was practicing, but, it was a very exhausting
Mm-hmm. How long did you do that?
experience. I did that for a year.
Mm-hmm.
And actually Ryan, my husband's family, as a graduation gift, were like, you guys go on a trip, do something. So we were planning to go to Ireland for a month. And so I was like, I'm going to do this crazy teaching schedule for a year to save up for going to Ireland for a month. And with some help from family and stuff, we did that. And right before we left for Ireland, I quit all of my lessons. And so when
I'll be back in a month, but
Yeah.
I'm just done. Yeah.
And I quit all of the schools, and when people asked, well, I want to still take lessons with you, it's like, well, we'll talk when I get back and see what we can work out. So I don't know if this is the best thing for, but for future.
Well, the thing I see about it is positive. You graduated with a performance degree in flute.
Yeah.
Right? Not a music ed degree.
No.
A performance degree in flute. But you were able to turn that into instant employment. You were able to make
Yeah.
enough money to save some money.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, you were
Yeah.
basically, it also was great training for anybody who wants to go into business for themselves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure.
You found out about how all that works,
For
about
sure.
how to deal with contractual arrangements with individual students and
Yeah.
with schools. So I can see all kinds of pluses that came out of that.
Yeah, for sure. It was a very good experience. It was exhausting, but there are always private teaching opportunities at schools. It seems like there's never really a shortage of those type of jobs if people want to do that. And I think it can be great. I think for me, the biggest challenge of it was not at all the teaching aspect. That's the part that you love. That's the part that reminds you why you're doing it. Most of the time, sometimes the students can be difficult and are there because they have to be there or whatever. But for the most part, the teaching aspect is great. It's the okay, I have a student at 7:30 in the morning, and then another one at 11, and then another one at, and it's the inefficiency of, okay, I have to go to this school, then I go to this school, and then I have a 4-hour break. I had a 4-hour break in Dripping Springs, I remember. And so it was enough time to go home and come back, but it wasn't really worth going home and come
Sure.
back. So, but you didn't really have an office or a space that was yours to be. So I joined the YMCA, and I would go and exercise, and then I would go and sit in the cafe and do the work that I needed to do for the paperwork and stuff. And sometimes I would go in the band hall and find a practice room and practice a little bit. But it's a little bit of an awkward situation. So for me, that was the part that I wanted to be done with, was just the inefficiency and then not really having your own space to kind of when you do have the downtime to use it in the way that you need to enjoy your life and also to practice and to work on yourself as a musician and all of that stuff. So once I transitioned to teaching at home, it was much, much better. better for me. Even though the money wasn't as good, it was like, I was much happier.
So currently, you teach at home and then freelance performances. Those are basically your two main sources of income at this time?
Actually, about a year ago, a little over a year ago, I made the transition to primarily performing. Actually kind of coinciding with transitioning to playing a lot more jazz and a lot more saxophone, there were a lot more gigs for me. So I actually teach very little now. And I was teaching 1 day a week, and then when grad school started, I am now not teaching any private students for the time being, and I have one, I teach the woodwinds for a community brass band project on Tuesday nights for an hour. And I was giving an applied music class, which I hope to start back up sometime, because I do miss it, and I know the people who are taking it miss it, but it's just as far as time commitment goes right now, it's a little hard. But yeah, right now I'm just teaching an hour a week.
Okay.
And playing gigs the rest of the time.
Last question would be, would you recommend Texas State to a potential student? And I guess to add a corollary to that, why would you recommend it? And, you know.
Yeah, of course, I would definitely recommend it to another student. And I don't just say that because I'm sitting here in the halls, you know, talking to yourself. I've always had a really good experience here. And the things that I said earlier about all the faculty just being so just generous with their time and their energy, and being very supportive, and the environment just feels like a community, and I really appreciate that. So.
And thank you very much, Lauryn Gould.
You're very welcome. Thank you.